We started a series. We're doing a series on some highlights in the life of David that we're calling An Unlikely Hero. And we noted that heroes aren't always what we expect. They don't always don't have to possess some kind of superpower. They don't even have to wear a cape. You know, a lot of times God used just ordinary people. There was one time that I actually got to meet Batman. Okay, I was in New York City, okay, in Times Square, and if you go to Times Square there, you probably could meet a superhero because they have these people in costume there. And I remember going there, and this guy, dressed up like Batman was there, except he wanted $5 to get my picture taken with him. And I'm thinking, man, you're Bruce Wayne, you're a billionaire, you're now hustling $5 pictures, you know. Plus, I found Batman was really about this tall. I thought, man, I thought you were taller than that, Batman. But anyway, some just unusual things here. But in the Bible, God used just common people like you and I, to do some things that were anything but common. And what we've discovered last week as we were looking at David and that great moment in which he slays the giant, is that we can become extraordinary, not because we're extraordinary, but because we have an extraordinary God. And that makes all the difference in the world. And David discovered that. He discovered that you plus God equals victory. Okay? You, no matter who you are, plus an all-powerful, almighty God can make all the difference in the world. Here, a 15-year-old kid defeats a massive giant. How did he do it? Because he placed his hope in the Lord. Instead of trusting in himself and his ability, he trusted in God. And we can do the same, but let me tell you, that trust, that hope in God is a very fragile thing. Not because God has any weaknesses in it. The problem is always us. We're the weakest link when it comes to seeing that take place. And if we're not careful, we get distracted very easily, right? Shiny things get our attention. You know, we're looking at the Lord, and then it's like, squirrel. We're just, our attention goes away somewhere else, and we find ourselves not trusting in God. And we find ourselves, when we're not trusting in God, not having the victory. And this becomes hard to focus on God, particularly when the circumstances of life become difficult, right? When things get hard, that's what captivates your attention. You're not looking at the Lord, you're looking at the fire that's there. You're not looking at God, you're looking at the struggle that you're going through, and that becomes the focal point of where we are. And it is easy to forget God when these things are reality in our life. It's easy for you and I to forget God when we're angry, isolated, or afraid, right? Now think about it in your own life. Isn't that true? Whenever we get angry, isolated, or afraid, those things come. These three conditions can kind of limit our potential. They can lead us to a place that we didn't intend to go to. They can really create havoc. In fact, if you think about this, think about one of your or some of your greatest regrets in life. And I promise you, probably, if you look at your greatest regret, you probably was a time where either you were angry, isolated, or afraid, or maybe all three. And those are things that can come. And whenever we feel that pressure, okay, we're angry, you feel that in there, yeah, or we get isolated, we don't have the help that we need, or we get afraid, we feel this tension, we feel this urgency, don't we, to do something, to do anything, even if it's the wrong thing, right? So we're just like, God says what? Wait on the Lord. And we're like, wait, I've waited long enough. It's time for me to do something. Okay, well, what are you supposed to do? I'm just going to do this. It may be the wrong thing. I'm just going to do something. And it becomes a problem for us because doing the wrong thing doesn't bring good results. So we're going to look at David's life again. And in David's life, there were two major failures that came in his life. The first one, or not the first one, but one of them that we all know about, the big failure of David in his life with Bathsheba. That happened when he was in his 50s. And we all know about the things that we've heard the story. But I want to talk about the very first major failure that came in David's life. And this came when David was in his 20s. And this isn't one that's very well noted, but it's still a very important thing. So let me just kind of set the stage as we go into our text. David has just killed the giant. He slayed the giant and did the impossible. And as he did that, and they conquered the Philistines' army that was there, David's notoriety shoots through the roof. David goes from an unknown shepherd boy to a celebrity. Everybody knows David now. They're giving him high fives when they see him. Everybody loves David. He's on everybody's talk show. David, tell us about killing Goliath. Go through that again. So he's getting notoriety. People are excited. They're wearing David T-shirts and stuff, and they're singing songs about David. And during this, the King Saul, is getting really insecure. He's getting jealous because they're not talking about great King Saul. They're singing about, Saul was slain his thousands. And they go, yeah, I like that. And then they go, and David is slain his 10,000. And he didn't like that at all. So what does Saul do? Well, Saul comes up with a plan to try to control David, to try to keep David in his mind, in his place. And so what does he do? Well, Saul decides, I'm going to offer one of my daughters to him. I'm going to offer Merab to David as a wife. And David thinks about it and he says, Saul, thank you, but I'm not worthy to be your son-in-law. I'm not worthy to accept that. And besides, Saul, I'm only 15. Okay, I don't even have my driver's license yet, I'm not ready to settle down, and so that doesn't work out too good. But then time passes on, she marries, and then David falls in love with Saul's other daughter, Michal. And they fall in love, and they get married, and things are going great. And during that process, David begins to have a relationship with the son of Saul, Jonathan, and they become best friends. I mean, they are just super friends. And all this kind of comes together. So Saul eventually looks at this and says, well, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. And why? Well, because his kids love David. They're loyal to David. And he was expecting just the opposite. And so what does Saul do? Well, he tries to figure out a way to get rid of David. And he says, I can't just be so outward and get rid of him. So what does he do? Saul starts ordering David to go on these suicide missions. Okay? And he says, he'll go on this mission. This is mission impossible. He's going to die and I'll be through. Well, miraculously, David keeps coming back victoriously. He goes on these impossible missions and wins. And you know what that does? That just swells his notoriety, because they're like, man, David, he's not just a one-hit wonder. I mean, he's the man. And now Saul is just infuriated by this. So he tries to do some nefarious things to David. But as he's starting to do that, every time he tries to do that, Michal and Jonathan warn David about that. And so he gets out of it. So one day they're having dinner. And David is not there. I mean, when you had invited to dinner at the king's table, that was a big deal. That was a big honor. And David's not there. And Saul was just he's kind of reached his breaking point, okay? And then Saul at the dinner table he just loses it. He kind of reaches a point and he loses it. And this is where we're going to pick up the story in 1 Samuel chapter 20, okay? And we're going to begin in verse 30. 1 Samuel 20 and verse 30. And here's how it says. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, Wasn't too fond of his wife there, is he? Do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. So Saul was like, Jonathan, you're my son. You're supposed to be the next king. And David, he's this usurper. He wants my job. He's trying to do this underhanded, and you're helping him. And I'm just angry as all get out. And David has to die. So what does Jonathan do? Well, Jonathan goes and he warns David. And he says, hey, David, my dad has just lost it. And for the meantime, you've got to get out of town. In fact, not out of town, you've got to get out of the kingdom right now because things are so bad. Okay? And so now David is facing a crisis. He's 22 years old at this time. He had been the giant slayer. Now he is dealing with this crisis of Saul wanting to take his life. And now he is the fugitive. He's running and going. And now David feels angry. Because what did David do? David just did what he's supposed to do. He was loyal. Now he's isolated because now he has to leave. And he's afraid because he doesn't know. And whenever we get angry, isolated, and afraid, we panic. And that's what David did. He goes into panic mode, right? I mean, you say, well, why David? Well, you and I do that, don't we? When we get in that mode and we get angry and we don't know what to do, or we get isolated from people and we don't know who to turn to, or we get afraid and we just don't know what's going on, we panic. And when we panic, here's what happens. We consider doing things that we ordinarily would never have thought of doing. Right? Don't you? When you feel that your back's up against the wall, you feel like you're being pushed and you have no other recourse, you start thinking through things that ordinarily you would never think of. When you're angry, don't you sometimes say things that you ordinarily would never say out loud? Right? Sometimes you use words that you would never use in church. Right? Yeah. Or when you feel isolated, sometimes you make decisions that ordinarily you would never make that decision, but you're making it because now you have no guidance that are there. Or when you're fearful. So we do that. And David did that. He panics at this situation. And he ends up doing things that he would never ordinarily do. 1 Samuel 21 now and verse 1. Then David came to Nob, and Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? So David flees, and he goes first of all to the city of Nob. And let me kind of explain what's going on here. The city of Nob had the tabernacle. At this time, Jerusalem was not the capital city of Israel. They had no temple. It was the tabernacle. And so the tabernacle would move from city to city depending on wherever it was a safe place. And right now the tabernacle happened to be in this city of Nob, and that's where the priest is, and that's where the tabernacle was all set up there. And David, first of all, goes there. Now David's arrival draws some confusion when it comes to the priest there. Ahimelech sees him, and he's just not understand what's going on, because here's David, and David shows up alone. Now David never shows up alone. David comes because he's Saul's man, and he comes with his entourage. When David enters town, everybody knows David's in town, okay? Because he's got all these men, and there's a big presence that's there. And this time David's all by himself, and so he's like, well, where is everybody? And because David is now feeling the pressure, okay? He's feeling the tension that's going on here. He's angry, he's isolated and afraid. David does something that he doesn't normally do. David lies. He just flat out tells a lie. And I find that kind of intriguing because he's here. The tabernacle is here, and just feet beyond where David is the Ark of the Covenant that has the stone tablets that Moses gave. And in those stone tablets is the law. And one of those laws says, thou shalt not what? Lie, right? And so there he is, lying in distance of the very law that was there. Well, David, why are you doing this? You know it's wrong. Again, when we are angry, isolated, and afraid, we do things that we never imagined that we would do. We never thought we would do that. We didn't expect to do that. David didn't normally do that, but because of that condition, that's what happened to him. He lies to them. Verse 2, and David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. So here's the lie. David says to the priest, I'm on a top secret mission. You know, I'm on a secret mission right now for the king. And yeah, I've got men, but they're hiding in a certain place, and they're waiting there for me. Okay? So you have to understand, don't tell anybody. This is a secret. Nobody's supposed to know this. And David continues to lie. And what David doesn't realize is the lie that he's telling right now is going to cost Ahimelech and his family and the rest of the priests there their lives. Their lives are going to be lost because of the lie that David has told. Verse 3, now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in thy hand, or what there is present. So David comes and he says to the priest, I need 5 loaves of bread. And the priest is thinking, this is really weird. You're on this mission and you didn't bring any food? And you want us to give you food? And so David asked for that, and he goes on and says, and the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread under thine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. What happened was, in the tabernacle, the priest would bake bread, fresh bread every day, and they would set these loaves of bread on there as an offering to God. Well, God never ate the bread, and so the next day the priest would be able to have the bread. They could eat the bread because it was consecrated unto the Lord. And so Ahimelech says, well, David, I mean, the only bread we have, you know, we don't have just regular bread, but we have this consecrated bread that's here, and that's all we have. We can give that to you, okay? And so again, he's thinking this is really strange that he would come. Why do you come here for bread? But if that wasn't weird enough, okay, it gets even stranger. And Ahimelech is just not sure what in the world is going on. Verse 8, skip down to verse 8. And David said unto Ahimelech, and is there not here under thy hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. He's like, what? You're on this secret mission, and you don't have any food, and I don't see your men, and you don't even have a weapon? This is just strange. This is unusual. Why would you go on a mission and not bring any of that? So it doesn't make it. And so David is like, hey, by the way, when you're picking up the bread, do you happen to have a spear or sword I could borrow? You know, because priests, they're always outfitted with those things, right? And as David is asking for it, what's going to happen is going to kind of transport him back in time in his mind to an event that defined his destiny. Okay, this is just gets very dramatic as it gets to this point here. Verse 9, and the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, or if thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here. And David said, there is none like that, give it me. So Ahimelech says, well, David, I mean, this isn't an armory. This is the temple. And we do have one sword. And it's the sword of Goliath. And now David is taken back to that moment where David defeated Goliath. And after Goliath falls to the ground dead, David takes the sword, Goliath's own sword, decapitates him. And he takes that sword and lifts it up in victory. And usually the victor would keep that sword as a token, but David, because he knew that God really won the battle, he gives the sword to the priest and says, hey, I want to dedicate this to the Lord, because the Lord's really the one that gave the victory. And so Ahimelech comes and he takes this cloth and wraps it, and he says, this is the sword. See, David at that time trusted in God. He wasn't fearful. He wasn't isolated. Okay? He didn't have any of those. God was there with him, and he was sensing the trust and the faith and the hope that he had in God. And now he's remembering all that. And so we look at this and we go, what happened to him? What happened to this hero that now has become a zero, right? What's the deal? And yet that's what we see happening here with David. Well, David's now facing some new giants. And these giants aren't like Goliath. These three giants are giants that you and I can face even. The giant of anger, of isolation, of fear. We get angry. We get angry because things don't go our way. We feel we've been mistreated. We don't like what's going on. And so we get angry, and we allow that anger now to direct our decisions. So instead of being submissive, instead of being kind, instead of doing the things that we normally would be doing, we allow anger to kind of drive us in a direction that we normally wouldn't go. And then usually we get isolated at some point. We decide, you know what, things aren't quite going my way, and so I don't really need God. I don't really need his people. And so we kind of withdraw from that. You know, I'm busy. I've got this very overwhelming schedule, okay? And so, of course, the only time I can take for myself is Sunday morning, right? I mean, Saturday I've got to give for me, and Sunday morning's God's, but I need it for me. And so we just kind of push that away, and we get isolated. Or then we just get afraid. Things are going on, and we're just scared because we don't know what to do. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how this is going to happen. And these three giants can undermine your trust in God. When they rise up before you, your first thought is not, I'm going to trust God through this. Your first thought is very, very different. Your first thought is like what David did. And what does David do? David lies, and he runs away. So David lies to the priest. He grabs his bread, he grabs the sword, and he runs away. Now this is where David's story intersects with your story, with my story, okay? Because think of this, if you would. When we need God the most, okay, this is when we are most tempted to run away, right? When you really need God the most, you need God to show up, that's when you're tempted to run away. Not to run towards God, but you're looking for the exit sign. You're looking for your next place to go to, your next job, your next church, your next relationship, your next whatever. And when we find ourselves in that predicament, we make really, really bad decisions. Have you noticed that? We make bad decisions. At the time, it seems like, well, this is the thing to do. But it's not. It's terrible decisions. And here's the thing. You can see that in other people's lives, right? You know, if right now you know people that because they are angry, isolated, or fearful, they've made some very terrible decisions. And you can actually see them doing that, and you know that. But here's the truth. It is almost impossible to see it in ourselves. It's easy for me to look over and say, well, yeah, I hit this person, that person's doing it. Well, what about me? Well, I would never do that. You're like, well, buddy, you better look again in the mirror. You're doing the same thing. And here's why it's hard for us to see it in ourselves. Because we are convinced that our situation, our circumstance is different. Right? Yeah, that's true for them, but you don't understand, my situation is different. I'm hurting more than anybody else. So you don't understand. The reason I can do this is because my pain is different than your pain. You don't understand. My burden is heavier than your burden. Yeah, I know you're working, and I know you've got to put in 60 hours a week, and I'm putting in 60, but you don't understand, my 60 hours is much more hard than your 60 hours, right? I understand you've got this physical problem going on, and you're contending with it, but what I'm going through is worse than yours, and so I have a different situation. And we make this excuse in our mind because we think our situation is different, that we get a pass. Or else we just lie to ourselves and we say it isn't going to happen to me. Right? It's like the alcoholic or the person that smokes or the person that takes drugs, and they say, I'm not going to be dependent. I'm not going to get lung cancer. I'm not going to get cirrhosis of the liver. I'm not going to have health problems. It won't happen to me. Right? And we lie to ourselves. And we don't know if that's going to happen or not, but we just tell ourselves the lie, and we believe it, and it impacts what we do. And here's what we think. If God was with me, this wouldn't be happening to me. Right? David's thinking, if God was really with me, I wouldn't be running from Saul. Isn't it so easy? Think of this. Isn't it so easy to trust God when we have nothing to trust Him with or nothing to trust Him for? It's easy to trust God. When I became a Christian in my high school, late high school thing, and I gave my life to Christ, and I was like, God, thank you for saving me. I want to give you my life. And God's probably like, okay, great, but you don't really have much to give me. Okay? You don't even own a car, You're living with your parents, You don't even have a job, So it's easy to give that and trust God when you don't have anything to trust Him with. And I didn't have anything to really trust Him for. But He says, I'll take it anyway. And, of course, life changes. And when things are easy, when you've got a good job and money's coming in and your health is going well and the weather's good and everything, it's easy to trust God. Yeah, I'm trusting God. Yeah, I've got faith in God. Why? Because there's nothing that comes in the way. There are no problems. There are no struggles. There's no difficulties. But when problems come, when the giants rise up, that becomes hard. That becomes a trap if we're not careful. So here's what David does. David takes his stuff and he leaves. And just get this. This is just hard to believe. David goes and he takes the bread and the sword, and of all places, guess where David flees? He goes into the land of the Philistines. And if that wasn't worse, he goes to the land of the Philistines, to the city of Gath. Guess who was a resident of the city of Gath? Goliath. And here's David going to the Philistine city of Gath with what? The sword of Goliath. And he's the guy that killed Goliath. I mean, does that make any sense? I mean, it's like, whoa, danger, Will Robinson, danger. This is just not a good thing to do. And he goes. And he goes up to the king. And he asks the king, could he join their army? And the king's not buying it. The king's like, I know who you are. You're David. You killed Goliath. You have a sword. And David starts to get nervous because what they might do to him. So David then starts to pretend like he's insane. He acts like he's crazy. And they're like, and the king's like, you know what? I got a lot of crazy people in my kingdom. I don't need another crazy person in my kingdom. And so David then leaves. He flees. David goes and he hides in a cave. And here's David, the mighty giant slayer, hiding in a cave. Eventually, he makes his way back to Israel. But the consequences of his decision and this lie are now coming to fruition. And David's now seeing the consequences of that. You see, when David was there, when David was at Nob, there was another person there, a man by the name of Doeg. And Doeg was a herdsman. He was Saul's herdsman. And he saw David there, and he saw David talk to Ahimelech. And he goes and he reports to Saul what he saw. And he says, King, I don't know if you know it, but David is there. David's with the priest. I saw David come to Nob, and he was talking to the priest, and the priest gave him food, and the priest gave him a weapon, and so they are in compliance with one another. He's on David's side. He's backing it up, and so Saul, again, hears this, and he's just furious beyond words. So he summons Ahimelech and his family and all the priests that are there to come before the king. 1 Samuel 22:13, and Saul said unto him, Why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, in that thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hath required of the Lord for him, that he should rise against me, to lie in wait as it is this day? He's just lost it. And Ahimelech is just like, whoa, time out. What are you talking about? Ahimelech is like, no, Saul, what do you mean? David is your son-in-law. Why would David conspire against you? I'm not conspiring against you. This is David. He's your man. Why wouldn't I give him bread or anything that he wants? He's your guy. Ahimelech can't understand where Saul's coming from, but Saul is so blinded by his anger that all he can see is a destruction here. And so Saul then orders his guards to kill all of them, to kill Ahimelech and his family and all the priests that are there. But because they're priests, Saul's guardsmen, they refused to carry out the order. They said, listen, he's the high priest. They're men of God. You know, we're fine killing Philistines and other people, but you know, God would have something to say, so we won't do it. And so Doeg is there, and he sees it as an opportunity now to advance himself. And so he steps up and he says, all right, king, if these guys won't do it, I'll go ahead and do it. And so Doeg comes and he kills Ahimelech and his family, and 85 priests are dead. And then Saul gives the order, I want my armies to go to Nob, and everything that's there I want you to kill. I want you to kill every man, woman, child. I want you to kill every animal. I just want you to burn it down. I want you to incinerate everything. And so they go there, and all those die except one of the sons of Ahimelech escapes. And he finds David, and he gives David the report of what has happened. And again, we see this mighty hero that's now become a zero. Tragic. What is your anger, isolation, and fear causing you to consider that you have never considered before? What is it? When you're angry, you're angry and you're thinking of some things, and in your mind your anger is causing you to think of some things that you never would have thought to do before. To lie, or to do something that you know is against what God wants, or to do something that was not appropriate. But what is that anger causing you? And that isolation, it's caused you to be alone, and so now you're believing things that aren't true. You're like, There's nobody that likes me. God doesn't like me. People don't like me. Nobody understands me. Woe is me, right? Or maybe you're fearful. And that fear causes that negativity to come. You become, you've got the Chicken Little syndrome, right? The sky is falling, the sky is falling. And so everything is doom and gloom and pessimistic and woe and fatalistic and stuff. What is it that you've allowed those things to cause you to do, to make decisions in your life that you never thought you would? And here's really the wake-up question I want you to ask with that. Who besides you do your considerations put at risk? Who besides you do your considerations put at risk? If you're considering these things, and if you did those things, who does that put at risk? And I'll tell you, it puts the people that you love the most, okay, and the people who love you the most at risk. Because see, it wasn't just David. I mean, David did this, and it wasn't just about David. David's decision impacted Ahimelech and all his family and all the priests that were there. That had nothing to do with anything that David did, but it impacted them. You understand this. It is never just about you. Well, it's me. I can make that decision. I can stop this. Yeah, but what you do impacts those that are around you. And the problem is sometimes when we get to that point, because we're angry, isolated, or fearful, we just don't care. Right? God says, hey, I want you to be supportive of this. I don't think I like that. So you know what? I'm just not going to have anything to do with that. It impacts it. God says, I want you to be this way. And you're like, well, I'm not feeling it today. It impacts you. And it impacts those that are around you. Your decisions impact your kids. It impacts your parents. It impacts your friends, your spouse, your fellow church members, your community. And later, David wants to give us some advice as he thinks about it. And he would write this in Psalm 9. He said, the Lord also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. And they that know thy name will put their trust in thee, for thou, Lord, hast not forsaken them that seek thee. And David learned this, that when you feel forsaken, you are mistaken. David felt forsaken. He says, no, you know what? I thought I was forsaken of God, but I wasn't. God was still there. God didn't leave me. He's there. My friends, don't let the giants of this life cause your greatest regrets. Don't do it. Understand that God's available if you'll turn to Him. Now, friend, the most important decision that you could ever make is to accept God's forgiveness and salvation. Have you done that? Has there been time and place in your life that you have trusted Jesus Christ as your Savior? I urge you to stop running, drop your sword, drop everything that you're carrying, and come to Him empty-handed, and He'll fill your life and heart with more than you could ever imagine. We're not forsaken. If somebody is gone, it's not God, it's us. And so I urge you, if you've never done it, to repent of your sin and receive the forgiveness that comes through Jesus Christ. Believe. And as believers here in the battle of life, let's remember these giants that come up against us. And let's remember that we have a God that's bigger than all of it. Our God is bigger, okay? bigger than all these things that come our way. He's bigger than the greatest opposition that you can find. He is bigger than the greatest fear you could face. He can handle it. So let's close today in prayer. Father, thank you for this lesson in David's life and how David's failure here helps us to learn to not consider these things that we feel such an impulse to embrace. Instead, help us to remember that you're here, even when we're not feeling it, to come to you, that you are our refuge. You are literally our stronghold. We, in time of trouble, should run into the castle of the Lord and find that protection, that encouragement, that help. In Jesus' name, amen.